Good morning. Everybody hear me? Yeah, we'll stick this back down. I was hoping Wes would be here this morning so I could show off my new sweet bolo tie to him, but I was hoping to make him jealous. Brother Bill Sanders can hook you up, David, all right? Just go see him. Okay, so Doyle and Scout are out of town, so you're stuck with me. And they had, ideas of what we should do. And anyway, I just went with what I wanted to do. So I'd been wanting to, well, let's see, we'll pull this up. Who do you think this is? You don't recognize him? Paul? No, no, it's not the Ten Commandments he's holding up. Okay, so it's a scroll. It's Elijah. So I was really interested in Elijah. I wanted to study a little bit more about him. So we're going to do one morning, quick overview of Elijah. So we don't know much about Elijah's background prior to his ministry as a mighty prophet of God. But his name in and of itself tells us a couple of things. So what does his name mean? Does anyone know what his name means? Heather, go ahead. You don't know? Justin wanted me to call on you more. So his name means Yahweh is God. So this flies in the face of the pervasive idol worship of Baal and Asherah that took place in the region he was from and lived in. His Hebrew parents must have been very brave and dedicated to God in order to name him Elijah. It would have taken some courage for Elijah himself to grow up and retain such a name. And then I was hoping T was going to be here. No one's here. Where's everyone at?
He's here somewhere.
Okay. Well, the native Texans, anyway, have seen the come and take it flag, So that's from the the soldiers that were there in Gonzales, and they had a cannon that the Mexicans had the Indians, and then the Texans, 20 people or something, go get their cannon, and they had sent a message back with them, come and take it, and then made that flag and raised the flag. They came back with a larger force, and that's besides the point. So this reminds me, literally, Yahweh is God. People that had completely fallen away from God and had worshipped false idols. Baal was a false god, and we'll look at that. 2 Kings, and we'll be reading a lot from, we'll be reading a lot from the 1 Kings, so if you want to have a finger. Verse 11, it says, there appeared and separated the two of them to heaven in a whirlwind. The follower of Elijah, or the successor, but he allowed the men to be set out. But anyway, 50 men searched for 3 days for Elijah. And didn't die. So if we look at James chapter 5, verses 17 through 18, it says, Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He prayed earnestly that it would not rain, and it did not rain on the land for 3.5 years. Again he prayed, and the heavens gave rain, and the earth produced its crops. So just by his prayer, he was able to keep it from raining on the earth for 3.5 years. And then he prayed again, and it brought rain. And all that's there in Kings. All right, and then back to probably his most famous, or my favorite, demonstration of power, the one I think of, was when he challenged, and then if someone can go ahead and pull this up, 1 Kings 18, verses 26 through 40, I'll let someone else read that. But the challenge that he put forth with the prophets of Baal. I don't know, do we have a crowd mic? If not, I can run this one. Are we supposed to have a crowd mic on Sunday morning? No? I don't know. There's one right there. All right. Someone want to read it? I'll call someone. 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 26 through 40.
So they took the bull which was given them, and they prepared it, and called on the name of Baal from morning even till noon, soon saying, "O Baal, hear us." But there was no voice; no one answered. And they leaped about the altar which they had made. And so it was at noon that Elijah mocked them and said, "Cry aloud, for he is a god. Either he is meditating, or he is busy, or he is on a journey, or perhaps he is sleeping and must be awakened." So they cried aloud and cut themselves, as was their custom, with knives and lances until the blood gushed out on them. And it was so, when midday was past, that they prophesied until the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice. But there was no voice, no one answered, no one paid attention. Then Elijah said to all the people, "Come near to me." So all the people came near to him, and he repaired the altar of the Lord that was broken down. And Elijah took 12 stones, according to the number of the tribes of the sons of Jacob, to whom the word of the Lord had come, saying, "Israel shall be your name." Then with the stones he built an altar in the name of the Lord, and he made a trench around the altar large enough to hold two seahs of seed. How far did you say? I'm sorry.
To 40.
40. Okay, I'm sorry. All right. And he put the wood in order, cut the bull in pieces, and laid it on the wood. And he said, "Fill your water pots with water and pour it on the burnt sacrifice and on the wood." Then he said, "Do it a second time." And they did it a second time. And he said, "Do it a third time." And they did it a third time. So the water ran all around the altar, and he also filled the trench with water. And it came to pass at the time of the offering of the evening sacrifice that Elijah the prophet came near it and said, "Lord God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known this day that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and that I have done all these things at your word. Hear me, O Lord, hear me, that this people may know that you are the Lord God, and you have turned their hearts back to you again." Then the fire of the Lord fell and consumed the burnt sacrifice, and the wood, and the stones, and the dust, and it licked up the water that was in the trench. Now when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces, and they said, "The Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God." And Elijah said to them, "Seize a prophet of Baal. Do not let one of them escape." So they seized them, and Elijah brought them down to the brook Kishon and executed them there.
Thank you, Hector. Yeah, so this is a pretty epic, I think, demonstration of God working through Elijah and Elijah's power here. Excuse me. There's all these people worshiping, from the nation of Israel, worshiping Baal, a false god, and there's much more people doing this than are following God. Very small percentage are following God, but anyway, so he challenges the prophets. Let's find out who the real God is. The prophets of Baal. He said, let's put up 2 altars. He said, and we will put a sacrifice on it, and you pray to your God, and I'll pray to my God, and we'll see whose altar catches on fire first. So it says there in verse 26 that they prayed to Baal, the prophets, and there was 450 prophets of Baal and then 400 prophets of Asherah. And they prayed from morning until noon, crying aloud, answer us, but there was no response. They started doing my version says dance, which is, other versions say limping. So some sort of something, maybe showing how they're distraught and trying to get Baal to respond. And then Elijah responds to him, taunting them. No, well, just shout a little louder. Maybe Baal's asleep. Maybe he's busy. Maybe he can't hear you. So shout a little louder. So he's over here making fun of them. And then how do they respond? They increase even more. They start cutting themselves, putting their own blood on the altar, on the sacrifice, which was not, obviously not according to the law they were given by God. But anyway, they continued until evening. And Elijah gets tired of it. He says, okay, all right, y'all are done. And he says, get 4 large jugs of water. Well, and Elijah dug a trench. He dug a trench around his altar. He said, get 4 large jugs of water and pour it all over the wood, all over the sacrifice, all over the altar. And they did so, and he told them, fill it up again, fill it up again. They did it 3 times. And then he had his mighty prayer to God, and it comes down, consumes the altar. The fire comes down, consumes the altar, consumes the sacrifice. And it says it licked up the water. And then all the people that were there to witness this, so there must have been thousands of people there, because we know there was hundreds and hundreds of the false prophets worshiping a false god. And he said, all the people, bowed down to God and said, He is the Lord, He is God, the Lord, He is God. And then Elijah says, okay, round up all the false prophets that were worshiping the false god and bring them down to this valley to me. And they did so, and he goes and slaughters all of them. So that's a pretty traumatic event, I think, when you read it. Any questions or comments? That's right. A lot of blood. So one of the other things that kind of makes me think of him as a great figure in the Bible is that he was there during the Transfiguration. If we read Matthew 17, verses 1 through 5, it says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah, talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. So we see that the 2 that accompanied Jesus was Moses and Elijah, kind of showing he was one of the, I guess, in my mind, one of the great figures of the Bible, and obviously very great to the Jewish people at that time. They kind of saw him as a savior of the Jews, redeeming them and saving them from evil nations and things like that. Any questions or comments on that? Go ahead, Bill.
Show you that, of course, Moses was the law. Moses was the law and the prophets. Elijah was the law given by Moses to God. Elijah was the time of the prophets. This was to show, and they were there talking with Jesus, probably talking to him about the sacrifice we made and everything. Of course, the scriptures don't say. But anyway, God said, This is my beloved son, hear ye him. We know later on from fact that soon the kingdom was going to be instituted, the church was going to be founded on the day of Pentecost, and Jesus was going to make the supreme sacrifice for our sins. And then the law of the prophets and the law of Moses was to be fulfilled, and the new law of grace would be coming into being.
That's right. So they were looking, yeah. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, we'll get in. I'll get into some of those points a little later. Also, or expand upon some of that. Anything else? There we go. So one of the other things that I thought of was that some thought Jesus was Elijah. In Matthew chapter 16, verses 13 through 14, it says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? They replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So again, we see where Elijah is kind of brought up in the same breath as Jesus. Of course, we know that Elijah was not, or Jesus was not Elijah. Later in that verse, he says, and who do you say I am? And they said, you're Jesus, the Son of God. All right, and one more thing I wanted to look at was some thought that Jesus was calling for Elijah when Jesus was crucified. So that's in Matthew chapter 27, verses 46 through 47. And it says, about 3 p.m, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema. I was going to get Wes to read this if he was here, but he's not, so I'm going to try. Lema sabachthani, or something like that, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing there heard this, they said, he is calling Elijah. Now we know that he was not calling Elijah. It tells us right there, what he was saying was, my God, but the Eli was similar to the word for my God. And then later we see that, or in the next slide actually, we're going to see that John the Baptist was fulfilled the prophecy of Elijah's return. And what this verse demonstrates, when Jesus was crucified, John the Baptist would have already been gone. He was already beheaded, and right? That's right? I think so. Okay. I'm getting nods from the elders, so we'll say yes. But anyway, so it shows that even though they were told that John the Baptist was Elijah, or he came in the spirit and power of Elijah, that they rejected that. They were looking for Elijah's return to be more of setting them free from Rome and things like this, just as they did with Jesus. They rejected Jesus as well, because the prophesied Jesus, return, the prophecies of Jesus they thought he was going to be an earthly kingdom. He was going to be an earthly king, and we know that he was a heavenly, or is the heavenly king. So interesting there that they thought he was calling for Elijah. All right. Any thoughts before we move on? So we're going to look at the connection that Elijah has or had with John the Baptist. So in 2 Kings chapter 1, verse 8, it says, they replied, he had a garment of hair and had a leather belt around his waist. The king said, that was Elijah the Tishbite. So we see that Elijah had a garment of hair. Other versions will say he was a hairy man, and that he had a leather belt. And if you look at Matthew chapter 3, verses 4, it says, John's clothes were made of camel's hair, and he had a leather belt around his waist. His food was locusts and wild honey. So we see that they're, in appearance, very similar, John the Baptist and Elijah. And Elijah also lived, I could spend probably several weeks going over Elijah's life, but at one point in time, Elijah did live in the wilderness, kind of like John the Baptist did. And Elijah lived off of meat and bread that ravens brought him in the morning and in the evening. So he was rugged like John the Baptist. So we can look at the prophecy of Elijah's return, and that is found in Malachi, chapter 4, verses 5 and 6. And it says, "See, I will send the prophet Elijah to you before that great and dreadful day of the Lord comes. He will turn the hearts of the parents of their children and the hearts of the children to their parents. Or else I will come and strike the land with total destruction." So we see that, Elijah's return was prophesied. And so the Jews were looking for his return. They were looking for his return. Now if we turn to John chapter 1, verses 19 through 23, we'll see that John the Baptist was not physically Elijah. And they're questioning John here. So it reads, "Now this was John's testimony when the Jewish leaders in Jerusalem sent priests and Levites to ask him who he was. He did not fail to confess, but confessed freely, 'I am not the Messiah.' They asked him, 'Then who are you? Are you Elijah?' He said, 'I am not.' 'Are you the prophet?' He answered, 'No.' Finally, they said, 'Who are you? Give us an answer to take back to those who sent us. What do you say about yourself?' John replied in the words of Isaiah the prophet, 'I'm the voice of one calling in the wilderness, make straight the way for the Lord.'" So we see that John, was prophesied in Isaiah also as coming before the Lord. And they asked if he was Elijah, and he said no, he was not. And this is kind of a side note, but it's interesting that they sent messengers here, the Jewish leaders did, instead of coming themselves, because John the Baptist was from the lineage, this is what I've read anyway, of priests. So that he should have been questioned by priests himself instead of, like, he was kind of a higher rank, It was almost like sending a lower rank person, the messenger, to come question him. Anyway. It's a fun little fact there. All right, so we see that by John's own admission, he was not Elijah. But we know that John the Baptist came with the spirit and the power of Elijah. And I'm going to see if somebody can read Matthew chapter 11, verses 7 through 14. If you'll raise your hand, okay, go ahead. Well, you wait for the mic just a second, Bill.
As they departed, Jesus began to say to the multitudes concerning John, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what did you go out to see? A man clothed in soft garments? Indeed, those who wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. But what did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I say to you, and more than a prophet. For this is he of whom it is written, Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.
Can you go ahead and read verse 11 through 14 as well?
Assuredly, I say to you, among those born of women, that there has not risen one greater than John the Baptist, but he who is least in the kingdom of heaven is greater than he. And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffers violence, and the violence take it by force. For all the prophets and all prophesied until John. And if you are willing to receive it, he is Elijah who is to come.
All right, thank you, Bill. So here we have, and maybe I should have set it up beforehand, but so it says that John's disciples came and talked to Jesus. So John at this time John the Baptist was in prison. So John the Baptist sent some of his disciples to Jesus to see basically what he was about. And so this is Jesus answering. But anyway, if you there at the end of the in verse 11, he says, truly I tell you, there's not one that has been born of woman greater than John the Baptist. So Jesus is putting John the Baptist on this very high pedestal. And then Jesus himself, there in verse 14, says, and if you are willing to accept it, he is the Elijah who was to come. So he's saying John the Baptist is the Elijah, is the fulfillment of the prophecy. All right, any other question or comments? Everyone's, I think, asleep since we shifted 30 minutes earlier. Oh, Emma's had us awake since 5:45, so we're wide awake. about ready for a nap, in fact. But all right, and then if we look at Luke chapter 1, if I can get someone to read that. Luke chapter 1, verses 13 through 17. If you'd raise your hand and we can run the mic to you.
But the angel said unto him, Fear not, Zacharias, because thou...
Fill you in.
Executed all the prophets with the sword. Then Jezebel sent a messenger unto Elijah, saying, So let the gods do to me, and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time. And when he saw that, he arose and ran for his life, and went to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness, and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he prayed that he might die, and said, It is enough. Now, Lord, take my life, for I am no better than my father's.
Thank you, Justin. So this section immediately follows the section we read where Elijah, goes out and challenges the prophets of Baal and mocks them, and then ends up just killing them all. 850 that he killed, that's how many were there of the prophets of Baal and Asherah. So immediately after that, Ahab was king of Israel during this time. The northern, there was Israel and Judah. And Jezebel was queen, I guess. And Jezebel, she was the one that was not a Jew or Jewish descent. And she was the one that kind of brought Ahab into all the idol worship and things like that. So definitely not a good person. But anyway, so after Elijah slain, he kills all these prophets, false prophets. Ahab goes and tells Jezebel everything that Elijah had done, and I don't know why, so this shows his fallibility. But Jezebel sent a message saying, "I'm going to get you," basically. And so what does Elijah do? He's afraid. So we see he's fearful. Again, he just killed 850 people. Not sure why he's afraid, but he's afraid. And he ran for his life. And then he went into the wilderness. And he prayed that he might die, is what it says. He was so scared of Jezebel. He says, "I've had enough, Lord. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors." So he was very discouraged during this time because Jezebel had to put a bounty on his head, basically. Any questions or comments there? Go ahead, Stephen. I was factoring in Stephen and Wes being here for this entire lesson. Prepared my material as such.
I kind of enjoy seeing this piece of Elijah because it gets you see such a man who has so many powerful stories and so much faith in God. And I think about that time in space where there were so many different enemies of Israel, inside and external. And you see this immediately, he just wiped out all these prophets. And all of a sudden, he gets told that the queen of those prophets says this, and immediately he just freaks out and runs. And I love to see that because it brings back this humanity to the people. And right after that, I know we didn't read it. I'm going to read a little bit into it. God did not attack him for that. You look at Jonah and his story, and Jonah ran away, but it wasn't out of fear. It wasn't out of a human response. It was out of a selfishness to not instruct the people, right? So I think it's a very different situation. But this one, God understands man. And he comes and he goes and wakes him up with an angel. And I love this line right here. He says, "Arise and eat." And he looked, and there was cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. So we now know we can survive on cake and water. Okay, so if those who question that ever,
I'm not sure it was
cake
birthday
and water.
cake, but
Now, I would go with chocolate for sure.
all right.
But he took care of him, and he said, "You got to do it again. You got a huge journey." But he understood man. And I think that's a beautiful piece of this story. And that reaction, he sees Elijah freak out, and immediately he just says, "You're good.
Yeah, feeds
Eat
him.
some cake and water. You got this."
Well, and then he went to sleep again, right?
Right.
And then he ate cake and water again.
Yep.
And then he went on this really long journey, and he needed it for the journey. He needed that rest and that
Yep.
food.
But the angel didn't critique him. He fed him. He strengthened him. I love it.
Yeah, well, that's good. Thank you, Stephen. All right, and then one more example, if someone could read 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 14 through 18. If you would, raise your hand so we can get the microphone to you as you're looking it up. 1 Kings chapter 19, verses 14 through 18.
He said, "I have been very jealous for the Lord God of hosts, for the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I alone, or only, am left, and they seek my life to take it away." And the Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel Meloah, you shall anoint to be prophet in your place. And the one who escapes from the sword of Hazael shall Jehu put to death. And the one who escapes from the sword of Jehu shall Elisha put to death. Yet I will leave 7,000 in Israel, all the knees that have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him."
So I think at first glance, you're kind of wondering, what is this poor judgment? But I think it's in that first part where he's basically saying, he's kind of discouraged again, talking about they've rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, put to death your prophets. And he says, I alone am left. I'm the only one. And then the Lord responds. He doesn't get angry, as Stephen said earlier, but says, go back. You're going to anoint this person to be king. You're going to anoint this person to succeed you as prophet. And then he says, and I reserve 7,000 in Israel. He's saying, so there's still 7,000 whose knees have not bowed down to Baal and whose mouths have not kissed him. So he's saying, no, you're not the only one. There's 7,000 others. There's these good people I'm going to put in place as king and as prophet to succeed you. So I think it kind of showed, Elijah thought, well, this nation's lost. I'm the only one left, but he didn't see, what God saw and kind of put judgment on them when, God said, no, there's still some left. They did not ever bow down to Baal, etc. So we can see that even though Elijah was very, very great in the Bible, one of the great figures and mentioned multiple times in the New Testament, and definitely a very powerful person. He was a man, and he did have some faults. Are there any other thoughts or questions, observations? All right. Well, now that I got y'all warmed up, class is over, so that's good. Perfect.
Whenever you read the list, and God kind of lays out this plan, right, with Elijah, he says, okay, anoint this person over this person over this. My head goes to, where would I be in that time? And I like to think of it that way sometimes. Would I have been on the short list of God's? Because you think about that, out of 7,000 of the prophets, and he talks about how many people in Israel who haven't bowed down, it's like, where am I at? And I think that's a good drawback to ourselves. Where would we be on that?
Excellent application, Stephen. I like it. We'll run over to Justin real quick. Yeah, and then the day may come where, we're the minority. Well, we probably already are, but as far as being, Christians in this country anyway.
Well, God didn't immediately correct Elijah. Elijah's in self-pity mode. He's depressed. And there was a course that had to run through before God said, now we're going to have the discussion. And I think it's important for us to realize that. I know in myself sometimes I get down and I'm not going to pick myself right up this day. It may be a week. Other people will be different.
You might have to eat some cake first and take a nap.
We got to get to that point at some point, but I think we have to let those emotions run their course and get through them. We need to recognize that ourselves.
Yeah, that's good. All right, appreciate you guys' thoughts and attention.